Hi everyone, this is Lolita and this is the painting demo portion of the Tints and Shades project. I hope you enjoy and learn something as always. Starting in our color mixing exercises, we've already made this chart and labeled it, and you can see here where I've gone in and made heavier lines on this particular chart every 5 rectangles, because we're going to do 5 tints of red where we mix in white. We're going to do 5 tints of red where we use the thinning out the pigment of the red and using the white of the paper and additional water to go from one tint, a dark red, into a light red, which a tint of red is a pink. So, and then we're going to do 5 shades, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shades of red, all the way to a dark red. And a tint is where you have the color plus white, and a shade is the color plus black. So this is going to be the area where we do shades, and we're going to do 1 row of red, 1 row of yellow tints and shades, a row of blue tints and shades. So those are the 3 primary colors. And then we're going to do a row of green tints and shades and a row of violet tints and shades, and then a row of orange tints and shades. And from your kit, you're going to use the violet number 176, which is going to be adjacent to the red. And then you're going to use the orange number 14, which is exactly below the yellow we used before. So it's right here in your kit. And then you're going to use the green number 115, which is just diagonal to that blue. So it's the green number 115 that we're going to use. And these are the colors that they appear like. So we're going to use 6 colors out of our palette this time. We're going to use the original red. We're going to use the blue that we've used before for our color wheel. And then we're going to use this yellow. For this demo, all I'm going to do for you at this point is I'm going to do some red tints, and I'm going to do some red shades. I'm going to paint in the red at first so we can get a baseline of what our red mixture is made up of. And that's my number 4. And for this area, what I want to do is I want to go in with a bigger brush. I thought I had pulled my number 4 at first, but I want to go in with a bigger brush, especially when I'm reactivating this red paint. So this is just red paint that I have pulled out of my palette over here, over the pans. I just pulled these out and they've dried since I started setting up for this video. And now what I want to do is just reactivate that, because that's the beauty of watercolor, is that we can go back in and reactivate that. So I'm just going to pull this down here, make it closer to me, and this still feels a little on the viscous side. Let's see what I'm getting if I put it over on my test paper. So I feel fairly comfortable with that pigment to water ratio that I've got there. But even though, like I said, I feel fairly comfortable, I'm still going to add in a little water, because I can see that it's sitting on the surface of that paper a little more than I'm interested in having my red sit on the surface of the paper. So it just tells me that I've got a little bit too much pigment, and more pigment than I'm interested in. So I'm going to use this paper as something of a protector between the paper I'm painting on and the surface. I don't want to get paint all over my board, so I'm just using another paper underneath there, and this one is just here, inconvenient. And I can paint flat and try to get that still that idea of the live edge going and get the washes happening. They're not quite as nice as the wash you would get if you had a tilt to your paper, but where this is again for you design students, and I don't expect you to have ideal conditions. If you can make ideal conditions and get yourself a 20-degree tilt that surface that you can paint on, that's going to be great. But I'm doing these paintings based on the idea that most of you probably aren't going to have those conditions available or have the capacity to set them up. I'm going over this just a little to even it out and also try to make some of the lines go away, some of the little streak lines. So now what I'm going to do is I've also got, I'm going to clean out my brush, get all of the red out of the bristles, and then I'm going to dip my brush into the white that I've already pulled out, and I'm going to add some white and start mixing up a white tint over here on the side, mix up some of this red, and I'm just going back into the clear water and taking some of this white that's already here and reactivating that. And I'm just going to take that over to this side of my little puddle that I've got here and start adding in some of that white to the red that I've got over here to the side. I'm going to try to keep some of it reserved so that way I can use this red for to do my other tints, and when I go in to do my tints with just the water. But I don't know if I'm going to be able to manage that because I did put quite a bit of white in there. So I'm going to go ahead and take a lot more of this red out into here. And I think I'll mix up a new red when I'm ready to. So there's when I'm ready to start mixing tints from red. And in fact, I might add more red into this. I have not wet this red yet. But I'm just going to go in and do a nice passage of water over that surface and work up that pan and bring some of this red back and put more of it into this corner over here. And I'm going to start feeding a little bit more of this red pigment into this corner over here. So I can get a deeper tone, a deeper value of red mixed with white. And I'm just going to put that first tint down next to the red that I had put before and see what my first tint looks like. And I'm going into that live edge, trying to keep the paint stick my bristles right back into an area of paint and paper that's already wet, and it allows me to move that paper around the paint around the paper just a little more evenly, get it distributed a little more evenly than if I just paint completely in a random place. I'm going to take some of that pigment off of my brush. I'm going to twirl my brush and go back into this area. And I'm twirling it to get a nice point. I didn't get a nice point that first time I twirled it. And I'm just going to move some of this around just a little more to get a slightly more even surface look to the little rectangle. I'm just passing that softly over the surface. And this is mostly because we're painting flat, trying to get that surface to be a lot more even toned. If you paint at a slight angle, that 20-degree angle, you can get it to look even more even. So since I've got a little more white over here, I'm going to go in and mix my next value. And since I'm going to mix 3 or 4 different values of tints with by adding white to my red, I feel this is a good halfway point between the darkest red that I've got there and the tint that I will eventually achieve by adding more white to this mixture. I'm just trying to apply it as evenly as possible, going back into that main area where I got that first mixture going, and putting it onto that, painting that swatch into that rectangle. The swatch of what I'm calling tint number 2. And that's my tint number 1. And we can see it's still, even though it's about the same value as the red that I put down, we can still see that it's a little cooler in its overall hue than the initial red without any white added in. So this white that we're using out of our kit, it does cool down the red just a little. So now I'm cleaning out my brush again, and I see I still have quite a bit of red pigment in those bristles, so I'm going in and cleaning out my brush, dipping back into the clear water, and that's running clear now. So I'm going to take a little more white from my palette, up from my area of white, and add that into this mixture of pink and get a lighter tint than what I had previously mixed. And so I feel that's going to cover all of my number 3 tint with white paint added. Okay, and there is my other value of pink. I can see that the more white that I add, the more even the pigment goes down. Because white has a different physicality to it, because it's more opaque than the other watercolors, and so it goes down a little thicker and a little more readily than some other watercolors. And since that wasn't real dark and I didn't have a whole lot of pigment left in my brush, I'm going to take this white. Looks like I've gotten a little bit of pink in it. So before I use that again for another color, I'm going to clean that out. But for this video, this section of the video, we're just going to, and since I've only got pink going there and in the water, only white in the water, I can move this and add a little bit more white pigment. And I'm going to add that to my final mixture over here. I want more white in that pigment, in that little new mixture pile that I'm mixing, and put that over the little bubblegum pink I had mixed up before. And let's take some more of that white out and add this over to this nice little pile of bubblegum pink I've got here. And I'm going to paint that in as my last tint over here in this rectangle. And just take that and add it to the amount of pigment I already have on that paper and brush that around. And then from here I'm going to switch back to red, and we're going to, you guys are going to follow me, and painting tints now with just water. And we're going to see what the difference is when you paint tints with just water and when you add white. So I'm going to use I'm going to reactivate this red over here. And of course I'm going to move it out to my palette. We don't ever want to paint directly from our little pans here. We want to move it over to our palette well. So we're never going to paint directly from the pan. We're always going to move it from this pan and have a nice puddle set out of pigmented water that you can use to mix and dilute from. You don't want to do it from there. Here you've got much better control over your mixture of paint and water. So this looks like I've mixed it a little more viscous than that red, so I'm anticipating I'm going to get a much heavier red than that red that I used in that section. So we can see that's true. So I'm just passing it all the way down that side of that rectangle and moving it forward just a little. My paper is already curling because this is not the most expensive paper for watercolor. If you want to get into that, you can explore further, but for the purposes of this class, we are using this student grade paper rather, and paint too. So these are both student grade that we're using. There's much more professional products out there, but for the purposes of this class, this is what we're using. So that's what my first square of red looks like. I'm not going to go back over and paint that red because it still gives me a good baseline, because this is the red that I used to mix up these tints from. And so I'm going to stick with that as my baseline. And all I'm going to do here now is I'm just going to add more water and just let some of that red leach out and get a little lighter by virtue of the water to pigment ratio that is in my new little mixture, or puddle as I like to call them. And that's going to be lighter than the value that I placed in my first rectangle, because it's got more water in it and less pigment. And you can also see that the less pigment you've got in your watercolor mixture, the smoother and the more wash-like even tone it goes down on your paper like. Because that pigment, and especially when it's student grade, it really doesn't want to go down into the fibers of the paper. And I'm just going to use, I dried my brush off over there, and I'm just using that last little section as a sponge and picking up that excess water color mixture with my brush. So I'm going to take more water and just dilute my paint even more and just pull this mixture off to the side and get a nice little even mixture going over here. And you can see when we do this, we use even less paint than we do when we mix tints the other way by using white. So I'm going to make sure that this is definitely lighter than what I put down before. And this is what I put, that little mixture that I put down before. And I cheated and just stole a quick little amount of water from my clean water. So I feel fairly confident that that's a lighter value than I used for my number 1 section. And I'm putting that down into my number 2 section of the values that I'm making with by adding just water. So I'm just getting some really nice, beautiful light values here, and probably want to get just a little more of that water, that pigment that moved over. So I've got another nice, beautiful little pink here, and as we are figuring out, tints of red are in fact pink. So I'm going to add even more water to this mixture and brush this over into my tint number 3 here on the paper. And this is a very diluted water mixture, a little bit of the last rectangle leached over into this. And this one is super, super, super light in tint. So these off-the-cuff tints that I mixed are much lighter than the ones I got when I mixed with just by adding white paint. So this one's going to be super light because there's almost only water on my brush, and so that last one is super light. I'm brushing off the excess water and pigment, just moving that around, and we can see that super light. It's almost as light as the one next to it. So let's see what shades I get from red. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to go back in and I'm going to activate this black that I've previously pulled out and put into my palette. I'm going to take my big flat brush and drop some water into this section and mix up some of that black paint, and then I'm going to add that black paint over here in the corner of this well and mix some of that into the red. And that's going to be my first tone, or rather my first shade of red. And I'm going to just clean my brush out and go back into my full red, and I'm going to place the red that I'm using to mix in with the black to get my different shades of red. And this is the red that I'm using, so I'm setting that first rectangle as the baseline of the pure hue that I'm using to mix up shades from, so this way we can see, have something of a gauge. And that's part of what we're going to use this chart for too, is to have a gauge of what happens when you mix up shades of red and all of the other colors that we're going to use. So I just took my brush, didn't worry that it was dirty, and stuck it right back into that area of the well of my palette where I already had mixed black in, and I'm mixing what I have left of my red of my bristles and picking up the black and just getting a nice smooth even tone mixture from what I've mixed up in the well. And I'm going to put that down as my first shade of red. Now remember, a shade of a color is the color plus black. And so now we're going to be making shades. And I'm going from making my dark shades to my light shades. If you feel like going and being creative, you can go from making lighter shades to darker shades. That would be okay. This just happened to be the direction I chose. And you're going to try to paint in that rectangle and use the tip of your brush to try to get as precise in there with your edges as possible. I'm going in and cleaning out my brush, and then I'm going to just take some of the red that I already have pre-mixed over here and use some of the water. It's getting a little dry, and mix another shade of red. This time I'm going to mix a slightly lighter shade of red than I did previously. I'm going to take some of that black and red mixture, and because I'm not really going to use it again, and mix that in and get my next tone of the shade of red. And we can see here that we get some very, almost like a violet. So we know that there's a lot of blue in that black, or a lot of blue tones in that black. So this is another shade of red, and it's slightly darker and than the original red. And so I'm just going to take that same dirty brush and mix it in with this pure red tones I have over here, and take some of this mixture and move this lighter red tone over to here. I'm going to clean my brush out, and I want to add more red into this mixture because I feel like I'm losing my red paint, and clean my brush out again before I go back into my red, because I don't want to contaminate it, and that's why we don't paint out of these, one of the reasons anyway. And I'm going to add more red into that mixture there, and then pull some of this water over. And then I see what I've got here, and so I've got another shade of red. This one has a lot more red in it, but it still is a bit more dulled or toned down or darker even in its overall value than that initial red that we used. And then I'm just going to mix a little bit more of that red into this overall mix and get just one last shade of red. Add a little bit water to that mixture, and I'm going to add a little more red to it also, so I have a little less black, a little more red mixture in it. And then that's what I'm going to place into my last little rectangle over here. And this is going to be my red shade, my last red shade that I mixed up. Add a little more of that into there. And it's only just slightly lighter than the one that I had before, but it's still not quite as bright and a saturated red as the initial red that we started out with. Now we're going to do this for every color that we have listed here. We're going to do tints by mixing white in, tints by just using the paper and water, and then we're going to mix 5 shades of each color too. So you'll have 5 shades of yellow, 5 shades of blue, 5 shades of green, 5 shades of violet, 5 shades of orange, and you're going to have 10 tints of each one. You'll have a yellow tint with white, a yellow tint with paper water, blue tint with white, blue tint with paper water, green tint with white, green tint with paper water, violet tint with white, violet tint with paper and water, and an orange tint with white, and an orange tint with paper and water. And I may or may not video those for you later, but for sure you guys get the idea, and either way I will show you a completed chart at some point. So this is the chart a little more up close that I have completed. I think I could have done a more varied job with getting tints with both my added white paint and where I use the paper and the water. And I think I could have done a little more variety in the last 3 shades that I came up with. But the main idea is to mix up 5 tints with white, 5 tints in the paper, and water, and 5 different shades. Again, I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. See you in the next video.